The twin suns of New Horizon cast long shadows across Ethan Drake's hydroponics garden, painting the alien sky in brilliant shades of amber and violet. His calloused hands moved methodically among the plants, each motion precise and purposeful, much like how he once handled weapons. The thought made him pause, his fingers brushing against a leaf of earth-born basil. 7 years of peace hadn't fully erased 2 decades of combat instincts. The distant hum of approaching vehicles broke his meditation. Ethan didn't look up, continuing his work with practiced indifference. He'd learned to tune out the sounds of the colony just as he'd learned to suppress memories of plasma fire and dying screams. The vehicles grew closer, but he maintained his focus on the delicate task of pruning his medicinal herbs. "Your earth plants continue to thrive, friend Drake." The gravelly voice belonged to Thrax, a Meridian merchant whose silver scales shifted colors with his moods. "The healing houses can't get enough of your herbs." "Plants are honest," Ethan replied, his deep voice carrying years of unspoken weight. "They don't care about your past, only how you tend them now." Thrax's scales rippled with amusement. "And yet you tend to weapons as carefully as you do these plants." When Ethan's shoulders tensed, the merchant raised his primary hands in a peaceful gesture. "Peace, friend. I merely observe. Though perhaps such skills may soon be needed again." Before Ethan could respond, the colony's warning sirens began to wail. The sound pierced the morning calm, sending flocks of native bird-like creatures scattering into the violet sky. Ethan straightened, his farmer's stance shifting subtly into something more alert, more dangerous. "The new overseer's forces," Thrax explained, his scales darkening with concern. "They're conducting what they call loyalty inspections in the immigrant quarter." Through the morning haze, a figure emerged, running toward them with desperate speed. As it drew closer, Ethan could make out distinctly non-human features, iridescent skin that seemed to catch and reflect the sunlight, and hair that moved like liquid silver. A luminary woman, one of the native species of New Horizon. She stumbled as she reached them, and Ethan caught her reflexively. Her skin was cool to the touch, and her eyes, with pupils like spinning galaxies, fixed on his face with a mixture of fear and hope. "Please," she gasped, her voice carrying the musical undertones characteristic of her species. "They're rounding up anyone who spoke against the new policies. My brother, he runs a school teaching both human and luminary children. They say it's forbidden now. Species must remain separate, they say, for cultural preservation." Ethan felt the familiar ice settle in his gut, the cold calculation of combat that he'd tried so hard to forget. "I don't get involved anymore," he said, but the words felt hollow even as they left his mouth. "I am Venna," she pressed, her luminescent hands gripping his forearms. "And you are Ethan Drake." "Yes, I know who you are. Everyone knows the stories of the ghost of Arcturus, the soldier who ended the border wars by choosing peace. But sometimes, peace must be protected." The sounds of chaos from the colony grew louder. Smoke began to rise from the immigrant quarter, and the sirens took on a more urgent tone. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his past pressing against his carefully constructed wall of tranquility. "The weapons you keep locked away," Thrax said quietly, his scales now a deep shade of midnight blue, "they were never meant for violence alone. They were meant for protection. For justice." Venna's galaxy eyes filled with tears that seemed to contain entire nebulae. "They're not just separating us. They're erasing decades of cooperation, of friendship between our peoples. My brother's school, it was a symbol of hope. Of what we could become together." Ethan looked at his garden, at the earth plants growing strong in alien soil. They thrived not in isolation, but in careful balance with the native flora he'd integrated into his gardens. 7 years ago, he'd sworn never to fight again, believing that violence could only beget violence. But as he watched smoke rise from the colony he'd called home, he understood that true peace wasn't the absence of conflict, it was the presence of justice. "Your brother," he said finally, his voice carrying the edge of steel that had earned him his old nickname. "Where are they holding him?" Vena's face lit up literally, her skin glowing with hope. "The old storage facilities near the spaceport. They're using them as temporary detention centers." Ethan nodded once, decisively. "Thrax, I need you to spread word through your merchant networks. Tell people to be ready, but not to fight, not yet. We do this smart, or we don't do it at all." The Meridian merchant scales shifted to a fierce orange. "Consider it done, friend Drake." As Ethan turned toward his dwelling, Vena called after him. "They say you refuse to fight anymore because you saw too much death." He paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. "I refuse to fight because I saw too much injustice done in the name of justice. There's a difference." His eyes hardened as another explosion echoed from the colony. "And right now, justice needs a hand." Inside his home, behind a false wall panel, lay a sealed container he hadn't opened in 7 years. The biometric lock recognized his palm print, and the lid hissed open to reveal his old combat armor, still maintained despite his vow. Besides it lay the plasma rifle that had helped him end the border wars, and the neural interface band that had earned him his nickname. As he began to suit up, Ethan reflected that sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought with weapons, but with principles. He had sworn off violence, yes, but he had never sworn off protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The neural interface band hummed to life as Ethan secured it around his forehead, flooding his consciousness with tactical data he hadn't accessed in 7 years. His armor's heads-up display projected a ghostly overlay of the colony's layout, highlighting potential entry points and security patrols. The familiar weight of the plasma rifle felt like greeting an old friend, one he'd hoped never to see again. Vena watched him with quiet awe as he emerged from his dwelling, now fully equipped. Her iridescent skin rippled with patterns that reflected her emotional state, hope mingled with fear. "I don't understand," she said softly. "You move differently now. Like light through crystal." "Neural combat integration," Ethan explained, checking his weapon systems with practiced efficiency. "It's why they called me the Ghost. The interface lets me process combat data faster than normal human reaction time." He paused, looking at her directly. "But it comes with a price. Every death, every casualty, they're all recorded. Perfect recall. It's why I quit." Thrax returned, his scales shifting between urgent reds and cautious greens. "The merchant network is activated. We have eyes throughout the colony. The Overseer's forces are methodical, they're working through each sector systematically. The detention center already holds over 200 people." Ethan's HUD highlighted multiple patrol patterns through the colony streets. The Overseer's forces were well organized, but they had one critical weakness: they weren't expecting resistance. 7 years of peace had made them complacent. "Your brother isn't the only one they're holding," Ethan said to Vena. "This isn't just about one school anymore. They're trying to dismantle everything we've built here. The integration, the cooperation, they see it as a threat." "But why?" Vena's galaxy eyes swirled with confusion. "The colony has prospered because of our unity, not in spite of it." "Fear," Ethan replied, his voice grim. "Fear of change, fear of difference. I've seen it before, on a dozen worlds. It always starts the same way, small restrictions in the name of preservation. Then segregation for cultural integrity. Finally, removal for security." His neural interface flagged a approaching patrol, and he motioned them into silence. 3 heavily armed guards passed nearby, their weapons held with the casual confidence of those unused to resistance. Ethan's combat systems automatically cataloged their weaponry, armor weak points, and response times. Once they passed, Thrax spoke in a low rumble. "The new Overseer, she arrived from the Central Systems 3 weeks ago. Rumors say she has connections to the Purist movement." Ethan's jaw tightened. The Purists, a political faction that had gained power in the aftermath of the border wars, preaching species segregation as the only path to lasting peace. He'd seen their handiwork before, on worlds where fear overwhelmed reason. "We need to move fast," he said, checking his tactical display. "But we need to be smart about this. A direct assault would just give them the excuse they need to crack down harder." He turned to Thrax. "How many of your merchant contacts can we trust completely?" The Meridian scales rippled with confidence. "At least 30, of various species. All have stakes in maintaining the colony's integration." "Good. We'll need them." Ethan's mind raced through possibilities, the neural interface helping him process scenarios at incredible speed. The detention center's security relies on fear and compliance. They don't have the manpower for a real siege. If we can create enough distractions. Vena's skin pulsed with sudden understanding. The market district. Today is the grand exchange, hundreds of people, multiple species, all trading. The guards are already stretched thin trying to implement the new segregation policies. Ethan nodded, a plan forming. "Thrax, have your merchants stage a series of administrative disputes. Nothing violent, just enough confusion to keep the guards occupied. Paperwork problems, licensing issues, crossed shipments, anything that requires official attention." The Meridian scales shifted to a calculating purple. "It will be done. Many have been looking for ways to resist without risking direct confrontation." Meanwhile, Ethan continued, his HUD highlighting a maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the detention center. "We'll use their own prejudices against them. They're so focused on keeping species separate, they've forgotten how well we work together." He spent the next hour outlining his plan, using his neural interface to coordinate timing and movements. The merchants would create their distractions precisely when the guard shifts changed, maximizing confusion. Luminary residents would use their natural bioluminescence to disrupt security sensors, while Meridian traders would leverage their multiple limbs to rapidly disable communication arrays under the guise of routine maintenance. As the suns reached their apex, casting harsh shadows across the colony's streets, Ethan felt the familiar pre-mission tension build in his muscles. His neural interface registered elevated heart rate, increased adrenaline production, the body preparing for combat. "Remember," he told Vena and Thrax, "the goal isn't to fight. It's to demonstrate that their policies are unenforceable. That segregation makes the colony weaker, not stronger." Vena's skin shimmered with determination. "And if they don't see reason?" Ethan checked his weapon one final time, the plasma core humming with barely contained energy. "Then we show them why forcing people apart only makes them fight harder to stay together." He activated his combat systems fully, feeling the neural interface expand his awareness to encompass the entire tactical space. Sometimes the best way to keep peace is to show exactly what you're capable of if it breaks. As they moved into position, Ethan reflected on the irony of his situation. 7 years ago, he'd laid down his weapons believing that violence could never serve peace. Now he was taking them up again for the same reason, because true peace wasn't just the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. And sometimes, justice needed more than just good intentions. It needed action. The first merchant disputes began right on schedule, drawing guards away from their posts. Ethan watched through his tactical display as the carefully orchestrated chaos began to spread through the colony. Soon, they would see whether 7 years of peace had made him forget the skills that had once made him legendary, or if they had taught him new ones that would make him even more effective. Either way, by sunset, the colony would understand that unity wasn't just a noble ideal, it was worth fighting for. The market district erupted into calculated chaos right on schedule. Ethan's neural interface tracked multiple disturbances spreading across his tactical display like ripples in a pond. Through his enhanced vision, he watched Thrax's merchant network execute their roles perfectly, a dropped crate here, a licensing dispute there, each minor incident requiring official attention and pulling guards away from the detention center. Your friends are quite effective, Venna whispered from beside him. They crouched in the shadows of a maintenance tunnel, her natural bioluminescence dimmed to near darkness. I've never seen Meridians and humans coordinate so smoothly. That's exactly what the Overseer fears, Ethan replied, his voice barely audible. His neural interface highlighted guard movements above them, each footstep sending vibrations through the colony's structure. When different species work together, we stop seeing each other as alien and start seeing each other as people. The detention center loomed ahead, a converted storage facility now housing hundreds of political prisoners. Ethan's tactical systems identified 19 guards on the perimeter, all human, a detail that made his jaw clench. The Overseer was deliberately using human forces to enforce segregation, playing into old prejudices and fears. Next phase, he sub-vocalized into his comm unit. Across the colony, Luminari residents began to implement their part of the plan. Their natural bioluminescence flared in patterns designed to overwhelm security sensors, creating false alarms that further scattered the guard forces. Venna touched his arm, her cool fingers sending a slight shiver through him. The guards are moving exactly as you predicted. How can you calculate so many variables at once? The neural interface helps, Ethan explained, watching the chaos unfold through his tactical overlay. But mostly it's experience. People follow patterns. Even when they think they're being unpredictable, they're usually just following a different pattern. A series of shouts from above drew their attention. Through the grating, they could see guards rushing to respond to yet another merchant dispute, this one involving a spectacular argument between a Meridian trader and a human supplier over supposedly mismatched shipping manifests. Now, Ethan said, rising from his crouch. They moved swiftly through the maintenance tunnel, his combat systems guiding them through blind spots in the security coverage. The neural interface hummed with increased activity, processing countless tactical variables in real time. They reached the detention center's lower level just as alarms began blaring throughout the colony. Ethan's HUD flashed with urgent updates. The Overseer had finally realized something coordinated was happening, but the response was confused, scattered by the multiple distractions they'd created. Your brother's cell block is 2 levels up, Ethan told Venna, his eyes scanning structural weaknesses in the facility's converted architecture. But first, we need to. A guard rounded the corner, weapon raised. Before he could shout a warning, Ethan moved with augmented speed, crossing the distance between them in a blur. The guard's finger tightened on the trigger, but Ethan was already inside his guard, one hand redirecting the weapon while the other delivered a precise strike to a nerve cluster. The guard crumpled, unconscious before he hit the ground. Venna stared at the fallen guard, then at Ethan. You didn't kill him. Death should always be the last resort, Ethan said, quickly securing the guard with his own restraints. Violence is a tool, not a solution. The real victory isn't in defeating an enemy, it's in showing them a better way. They moved through the facility like shadows, Ethan's combat systems allowing them to avoid most confrontations. When fighting was unavoidable, he used minimal force, leaving a trail of unconscious but unharmed guards in their wake. His neural interface recorded everything, every choice, every moment of mercy, building a different kind of combat record than the one that had haunted him for 7 years. They found Venna's brother, Sareth, in a crowded cell with other educators and community leaders. His silver hair was dulled by dust, but his galaxy eyes lit up at the sight of his sister. As Ethan worked on the lock, his tactical display warned of approaching reinforcements. The Overseer's personal security force, he said, his voice tight with concentration. Heavily armed, military-grade equipment. They'll be here in 3 minutes. We won't all make it out in time, Sareth said, looking at the other prisoners. And they'll punish those who remain for our escape. Ethan's neural interface ran through scenarios, calculating odds and outcomes at incredible speed. The original plan had been a quick extraction, but seeing the cells full of innocent people, humans, Luminari, and Meridians all imprisoned together, changed everything. New plan, he announced, his combat systems shifting to full tactical mode. We're taking everyone. Vena, I need your bioluminescence at maximum output. Sereth, gather everyone who can move on their own. Those who can't, will carry. Vena's skin began to pulse with brilliant light. The guards will see us coming. Counting on it, Ethan replied, his neural interface already adapting their escape route. Sometimes the best way to hide is to blind them with the truth. He activated his comm unit. Thrax, execute Protocol Sunrise. Light up every sector. Across the colony, hundreds of luminari began to glow in coordinated patterns, while Meridian merchants launched emergency flares under the guise of a cultural celebration. The sudden explosion of light overwhelmed security systems and threw the guards into confusion. As they led the prisoners toward freedom, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in 7 years, the pure satisfaction of using his skills not for destruction, but for protection. His neural interface recorded everything, the grateful faces, the joined hands across species, the moment when guards began lowering their weapons, realizing they were on the wrong side of history. The overseer's voice boomed through the colony's communication system, demanding order, threatening consequences. But her words fell on deaf ears. The people of New Horizon, human and alien alike, had glimpsed a truth that no amount of segregation could erase: they were stronger together than apart. As they emerged into the chaos of the colony streets, Ethan's tactical systems highlighted something unexpected: colonists of all species were emerging from their homes, forming a living corridor to protect the escaping prisoners. The neural interface captured it all, recording not violence, but unity, not combat, but cooperation. I think, Vena said, her hand finding his as they led her brother to safety, this is what real peace looks like. Ethan nodded, watching humans, luminari, and meridians working together with seamless coordination. His neural interface, designed for warfare, was instead recording a revolution of compassion and cooperation. And for the first time in 7 years, the weight of his weapons felt not like a burden, but like a tool for building something better. The aftermath of the prison break transformed the colony into a powder keg. Ethan's neural interface tracked hundreds of movement patterns through the streets as humans, luminari, and meridians gathered in mixed groups, protecting each other from the overseer's increasingly desperate security sweeps. The twin suns had set, but the colony blazed with luminari bioluminescence, turning the night into a defiant display of unity. From his makeshift command center in an abandoned warehouse, Ethan watched the tactical displays with growing concern. The overseer's response wasn't following any standard protocol he'd encountered. His combat systems flagged unusual movement patterns among the security forces. They were positioning themselves not to maintain order, but as if preparing for something much larger. Another transport ship just landed at the spaceport, Thrax reported, his scales shifting through anxious patterns. Third one today. They're offloading cargo under heavy guard. Let me see, Vena said, her luminescent skin providing soft light as she studied the surveillance feeds. After the prison break, she'd proven herself an invaluable strategist, her ability to interpret emotional patterns complementing Ethan's tactical analysis. Those containers, they're using the same markings as the school supplies they confiscated last month. Ethan's neural interface zoomed in on the footage, enhancing and analyzing the markings. Something about them triggered a combat memory he'd buried years ago. Those aren't standard shipping codes, he said slowly, the realization hitting him like a plasma burst. They're military designations. I saw them during the border wars. Sereth, who had been helping coordinate the refugee networks, looked up sharply. Military? But New Horizon is a civilian colony. We have no strategic value. Unless. Ethan's combat systems were already processing the implications, running through scenarios that grew darker with each calculation. Unless the segregation policies aren't the end goal. They're just preparation. He interfaced with the colony's communication network, his neural implants cutting through layers of security to access restricted channels. What he found made his blood run cold. The overseer isn't working for the colonial administration. Those ships are registered to the Terminus Corporation. The weapons manufacturer? Vena's galaxy eyes widened. The same one that profited from the border wars? Ethan nodded grimly. They're not just separating species. They're setting up military infrastructure. New Horizon isn't just some random colony, it's the only place in this sector where luminary crystals and meridian biotech naturally overlap. Perfect for weapons development. But they need us separated, Sereth concluded, his silver hair shimmering with anger. Because together, we might realize what they're building. My school, we were teaching children how luminary crystal harmonics interact with meridian biological systems. Knowledge that could be used. For weapons, Ethan finished. His neural interface was already compiling data, showing how the pieces fit together. The segregation policies, the targeted arrests, the mysterious shipments, all part of a larger plan to turn their peaceful colony into a secret weapons research facility. A sudden alert flashed across his tactical display. Multiple ships entering orbit. Military-grade, heavy armor. His combat systems identified them immediately, triggering memories he'd tried to forget. Terminus Corporation's private security force. The same ones they used to pacify colonies during the border wars. Vena moved closer to him, her cool presence steadying. How long do we have? Hours, maybe less. Ethan's mind raced through options, his neural interface processing countless tactical scenarios. Most ended in bloodshed. They'll try to secure the crystal mines and biotech labs first. Then they'll declare martial law, claiming it's for our own protection. We have to warn everyone, Thrax said, his scales now a deep, determined purple. My merchant network reaches every sector of the colony. Do it, Ethan commanded. But tell them to stay calm. If we panic, we play right into their hands. He turned to Sereth. Your students, how many understand the interaction between luminary crystals and meridian biotech? Enough to prove what Terminus is planning, Sereth replied. But we'll need access to the school's data cores. They're still under guard. Ethan's neural interface highlighted patrol patterns around the school, identifying vulnerabilities. We're not just fighting for integration anymore, he said, checking his weapons. We're fighting for our colony's soul. Terminus wants to turn our diversity into a weapon. We'll show them it's our strength instead. He laid out the plan quickly, his combat systems coordinating movements with practiced precision. Thrax's merchants would spread the word, gathering evidence of Terminus's true intentions. Luminary residents would use their bioluminescence to create a network of light-based communications, impossible for Terminus to intercept. Meridian workers would leverage their multiple limbs to rapidly fortify key positions. And us? Vena asked, her skin pulsing with determined patterns. We're going to the school, Ethan replied, his neural interface already mapping their route. The data cores will prove what Terminus is planning. But more importantly, they'll show everyone what we can achieve together. As they moved out into the darkened colony streets, Ethan felt the weight of the moment. His neural interface wasn't just recording tactical data anymore, it was documenting a turning point. 7 years ago, he'd laid down his weapons believing he could no longer make a difference. Now he understood that sometimes the greatest battles weren't won with weapons at all, but with the courage to stand together against those who would tear them apart. The orbital ships drew closer, their massive forms now visible through breaks in the clouds. But as Ethan looked around at the determined faces of humans, luminari, and meridians working together, he knew Terminus had already lost. They were bringing weapons to a fight that would be won with unity, trying to conquer a people who had already discovered that their differences made them stronger. His neural interface calculated their odds of success at less than 50%. But some things, Ethan had learned, couldn't be measured in probabilities. They could only be measured in the strength of people standing together, refusing to be divided. The school's data core hummed with energy as Sareth worked, his fingers flying across the interface while Ethan's combat systems monitored approaching threats. Through the reinforced windows, they could see Terminus Corporation dropships descending through New Horizons' violet atmosphere, their hulls gleaming with menace in the light of the twin suns. "Download complete," Sareth announced, his galaxy eyes reflecting the screen's glow. "Everything's here: research data, student projects, proof of how luminary crystals and meridian biotech can be used for either healing or weapons. The choice Terminus made is clear." Ethan's neural interface suddenly flashed with multiple warnings. Security forces converging. Heavy weapons. He turned to Venna, who stood guard by the door. "Signal the others. It's time." Venna's skin flared with precise patterns, sending light-coded messages through the colony's windows and transparisteel panels. Within moments, answering pulses came from hundreds of luminari throughout the colony. The signal spread like wildfire, passing from sector to sector. "Incoming transmission," Thrax's voice crackled through Ethan's comm, "the Overseer is making her move." The colony's communication systems burst to life with the Overseer's voice, cold and precise. "Citizens of New Horizon. Dangerous elements have disrupted our peaceful segregation protocols. For your protection, Terminus Corporation forces will now assume direct control. Resist, and you will be deemed hostile." Ethan's neural interface projected multiple tactical overlays as Terminus forces began securing key colonial infrastructure. But something was different about their movements. They were hesitant, uncertain. Through his enhanced vision, he could see why, at every checkpoint, mixed groups of humans, luminari, and meridians stood together, offering no violence, but refusing to move. "They expected us to be divided," Venna observed, her skin pulsing with fierce pride. "They don't know how to handle us united." A massive explosion rocked the colony's outskirts. Ethan's combat systems immediately identified the source. Terminus forces had destroyed one of the empty storage facilities, likely as a show of force. But the effect wasn't what they intended. Instead of causing panic, the explosion triggered an immediate response. Luminari throughout the colony began pulsing in synchronized patterns, their bioluminescence creating a network of living light. Meridian merchants and workers used their multiple limbs to rapidly construct barricades and safe zones, while humans coordinated evacuation routes and supply lines. "They're not running," Sareth said in wonder. "No one's running." "Because we're done running," Ethan replied, his neural interface capturing the extraordinary scene unfolding across the colony. "Upload the data. Every terminal, every public screen. Let everyone see what they were really planning." The truth spread faster than Terminus could contain it. The corporation's plan to weaponize the natural harmony between species became a symbol of everything they were fighting against. Where Terminus saw potential for weapons, the colonists saw proof of how their differences made them stronger. The Overseer's voice came again, now edged with desperation. "This is your final warning. Disperse and return to your designated sectors, or..." Her transmission cut off as Meridian tech experts, coordinating with human programmers, breached the colonial communications network. In its place, the data from the school began broadcasting, students of different species working together, discoveries that could heal rather than harm, proof that cooperation yielded greater results than segregation. Ethan's combat systems registered Terminus forces falling back, regrouping. Their tactical advantage had evaporated in the face of a united population that refused to be their raw material for weapons development. His neural interface calculated their remaining options. They could either withdraw or commit to a level of violence that would attract attention from colonial authorities. "Incoming transmission," Thrax reported. From the Terminus command ship. Through his tactical display, Ethan watched the corporate vessels begin to pull back. They had come prepared for civil unrest, for divided populations they could easily control. Instead, they faced a colony that had turned its differences into strengths, its diversity into unity. The sun was rising as the last Terminus ship broke atmosphere, leaving behind their overseer and their failed attempt at conquest. Ethan's neural interface recorded the scene as humans, Luminari, and Meridians emerged together into the morning light. Where Terminus had tried to build weapons, they had instead forged something far more powerful, a community that refused to be divided. What happens now? Venna asked, her cool hand finding his as they watched the colony come alive with celebration. Ethan looked at the school where all this had started, where children of different species had learned together until someone decided their unity was a threat. His combat systems were still active, but they were recording something new now, not battle tactics, but the strength of people standing together. Now, he said, feeling the weight of his weapons and knowing he would keep them, not to fight but to protect, we build something better. Together. Sereth was already organizing teams to restart the school, while Thrax's merchant network began coordinating relief efforts for those affected by the conflict. Humans worked alongside Luminari and Meridians, their different abilities complementing each other in ways Terminus had feared but never understood. As the twin suns climbed higher, casting their purple-orange light across New Horizon, Ethan's neural interface captured one final image, a human child helping a young Luminari adjust their bioluminescence while a Meridian teacher watched with all four arms clasped in joy. It wasn't just an end to the conflict, it was a beginning of something new. 7 years ago, he had laid down his weapons believing he could no longer make a difference. Now he understood that the greatest victories weren't won through combat, but through the courage to stand together, to protect what was right, and to build a future where differences weren't weapons to be feared, but strengths to be celebrated. The ghost of Arcturus had fought his last battle not with weapons, but with unity. And in doing so, he had helped forge something stronger than any weapon Terminus could have built, a community that knew its true power lay not in division, but in standing together, regardless of species or origin, united in the simple, powerful truth that they were stronger together than apart.